All right, as we await the ANC NEC's decision on the party's possible coalition partners, I'm joined by a panel of guests. They are going to help us understand where we are right now as a country, what we know and possibly what we don't know, but also importantly, the kinds of predictions that might come out of that ANC NEC meeting and the implications thereof. And to help us with this is Piet Croucamp. He is a political analyst who is joining us. Melusi Ncala is from Corruption Watch. Yolanda Yoli is from the organization Right to Know. And Cosatu is an alliance partner of the ANC, and representing them is Matthew Parks. To all of you, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Mr. Parks, it probably makes sense to start with you in terms of just updating the nation about what you know so far about the discussions that are going on behind closed doors at Boksburg. What do you know about whether or not the president will ultimately address this evening?
Yeah, no, good evening. Thanks, Polly. Evening to the colleagues. Look, I think we all need to be a little bit patient. I think we need to give the ANC a little bit of breathing space. We know that correctly, so society is very keen to know what's going to happen. And for the first time since '94, we don't have a 51% majority party. But of course, we all know that the ANC is the only party which can form government and would be led by the president, Cyril Ramaphosa. So look, the NEC is meeting today. I think we believe the president would address or give some sort of announcement tonight. We think about 9 o'clock, thereabouts. But obviously the ANC would speak for itself. We don't think the ANC can really announce much more than simply indicating what they've indicated at the NWC press briefing yesterday, or Tuesday rather, where they wanted to have a government of national unity. Because the ANC itself, as they indicated, is still having negotiations with different parties. And as Cosatu, we've had meetings this week. Our national office bearers have met on Monday and Tuesday. Yeah. We had our political commission yesterday. We're convening a special CEC meeting on Wednesday next week to kind of finalize our positions. And also, I think that the South African Communist Party, which obviously speaks for itself, but they've also had some initial announcements yesterday. But we will be meeting with the party and with the ANC as our alliance partners to kind of share Cosatu's views and to see how can we assist the ANC to come to a final position on its part. So it's still early stages. But I think for us what's critical, Polly, is that we establish very firm principles about what should guide a coalition government, whatever modality one seeks. Do we seek a minority ANC government? Do we seek a government of national unity? How would that be constituted? Do you seek a coalition government? There are a lot of pros and cons to all options. There are a lot of consequences we need to think through carefully. We really want, Polly, to avoid what you see at local government, where people rush into positions for the sake of position. We want to have principles, for example, that we abide by the Constitution, we respect the rule of law, we maintain the fight against crime and corruption, the campaign for renewal. And as a trade union federation, what is also sacrosanct for us is that the workers' rights, the labor laws must be protected. The ANC's transformation mandate must be maintained. So I think if we can maintain those principles, then it should not be too difficult to find what are the modalities that can give a stable government for the nation.
Yeah, just out of interest, Matthew Parks, before I move on to other panelists, are any of Cosatu's office bearers part of this meeting tonight?
No. So initially we had understood that the Cosatu and the Alliance would be included in it, but then we were informed yesterday that no, it's a normal NEC meeting. And they've indicated to us informally or verbally rather that they would include or they would have an extended NEC later on. They haven't given us a date yet, and we do appreciate the severe time pressures, severe constraints, and also this is uncharted territory for the ANC, for the nation, for the alliance. So no, we're not part of the NEC discussion today.
All right.
But we did have an alliance secretary on Monday beforehand.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that explanation. Let's come to you, Ms. Yoli. From Right to Know, what is your organization interested in as we anticipate the outcomes of this meeting by the ANC NEC?
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to confirm my audibility.
Yeah, you are audible.
Sure.
I can hear you.
That's great. That's great. So for Right to Know organization, I think for most civil society organizations, it's quite a tricky situation because like Mr. Parks has mentioned here that there are pros and cons to a possible coalition government. And I think what we are interested in as Right to Know is how this formation of a government will impact, civil society organizations and the community at large, because the role of civil society organizations, is part of is advocacy, and service delivery to communities. So more than anything, our interest is particularly on how this government will impact, the country in terms of civil society organizations and communities in general. What a time to be alive, where the ANC, for the first time in 30 years, does not have an outright majority. And I think that a coalition government is something that could work well for the country. It has a lot of pros, such as that, having different political parties who have different interests, they could be representative of the broader population, regardless of their different constituencies. But at the same time, there are questions of accountability, as we've had before in the country. So all those concerns put us in a very tricky situation. But more than anything, or rather importantly, is how that government formation will impact civil society organizations, because they do play a huge role, in the country.
Yeah. Piet Croucamp, let's come to you. The phrase uncharted territory is almost becoming a national lexicon. We are in uncharted waters. However, I want to take from what Ms. Yoli has just said that at the moment there are pros and cons. There are positives and it would seem there are lots of negatives at the moment. Do you think that this 7th administration could introduce something spectacularly positive for this country, or it's wishful thinking?
Yeah, well, it'd have to be spectacular at first, because let me tell you this, if you think about it carefully, there's a lot of impossibilities. We're talking about negatives and positives, there's a lot of impossibilities. This afternoon still, the ANC has spoken to former President Jacob Zuma. As far as I know, they didn't have very specific talks with the DA. If they do include President Zuma, which they seem to think is important for, in an effort to prevent instability in KwaZulu-Natal, it almost certainly rules out the DA. If the DA campaigned this election on the basis that the EFF and the MK will be excluded, it looks like the ANC seems to seek a broad church of organizations, a type of government of national unity, and include all these political parties. I can't imagine the DA taking part, so that leaves you with MK and the EFF. If Jacob Zuma and MK maintains their position that they cannot work with Cyril Ramaphosa, which I think is almost a given, then that leaves the ANC with the EFF and one or two smaller parties like the Patriotic Alliance, and they can get a majority, and they can elect the president, and they can go on. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the scenario that we will end.
What about a minority government, Piet Croucamp? And just explain to you're saying there's no need for that?
Yeah, look, the EFF is desperate, absolutely desperate to work with the ANC on this. They've made it clear. The ANC can actually work with the EFF, and what they do is the moment they announce that they have an arrangement with the EFF, they can make it an informal arrangement. The EFF will settle for that. They can at the same time announce that existing policies will be honored, and I think it might stabilize the rand and the international political economy fears a little bit. So it can all be kicking the can down the road type of scenarios, and that's quite possible. They don't need to try to incorporate a destabilizing force such as MK. They don't need to incorporate the DA that's going to make demands, which is almost impossible for the ANC to conform to. The easiest option here is to go into arrangement with the Patriotic Alliance and with the EFF and maybe one or two other smaller parties, and then just set the agenda and set the frame of reference in terms of which this will happen. And for now, the EFF is so absolutely desperate to be part of this deal that they will for now pacify their own urges and interests, and they will go with the flow, and it will be a broad type of reference point according to which they will be governed. Of course, they will want some certain positions, maybe in Parliament or in the cabinet, or they will have to make arrangements as far as Gauteng is concerned. In other words, there must be a coalition government in Gauteng and maybe in another province. So they'll make their demands. But it's the easiest. I can't figure out anything else. That's the easiest option. Go with the EFF, take the PA with you. You have a majority. You can elect the president, and you can still set the agenda, and off you go.
Yeah. Let's bring in Mr. Ncala from Corruption Watch. Your organization's name speaks for itself, sir. Yours is concerned with corruption. Would that be the ideal coalition government? ANC, EFF, Patriotic Alliance, and any other smaller party stitch that up, and you have a government in the 7th administration?
What matters mostly when it comes to coalition government, Xoli, is from an anti-corruption perspective, is more the principles upon which that government is built on, rather than the composition of partners. So, because the belief, at least from the onset, is that there needs to be some form of accountability mechanisms considered in the arrangement. Mm-hmm. So we now know for a fact that no party can have full power and full oversight and do as it has, as we've seen in the previous administration or administrations. Mm. So now the situation is such that whoever is going to be in the executive probably has to live with the fact that their opponents or people that they're working with in this arrangement is going to be sitting in Parliament as the heads of various committees and also as Speaker, which then kicks in to some extent, political shenanigans aside, of course, a level of accountability. Mm. And so what one would hope for is that there will be a great degree of transparency. It's of utmost importance that the South African society knows exactly what's the nature of these discussions, what are the agreements, how will people be held accountable, because transparency and accountability go hand in hand. In fact, accountability perhaps reinforces the issue of transparency. Yeah. And given that there are such large amounts of distrust from the public in government institutions and also politicians, that is very, very crucial, because the public are also going to play a role in making this arrangement a success or not.
Yeah. Matthew Parks, I know that you have to leave, so let me get you some quick fire questions and then we'll release you. A great deal of transparency given the level of distrust. Would the ANC, EFF, Patriotic Alliance and whoever else foster that transparency, or would that arrangement give us the transparency that Mr. Ncala is talking about from a corruption point of view?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's one of the critical principles for Cosatu, is that whatever configuration we look at the end of the day, whether it's a government of national unity, whether it's a coalition government, whether it's a minority government, whatever modalities one looks at, the issue of transparency, the issues, more importantly, of corruption, of the maintaining the renewal campaign, that for us is sacrosanct. So we know that the election results are very messy because we don't have a 51% majority. So that requires the political parties, including the ANC, to find some sort of modality which can work, which is not too unstable, not too compromised or messy. It is going to be very, very difficult, to be honest. It's going to require weekly management because the ANC has done well in the last couple of years on the renewal, the step aside, the anti-corruption front. The fact, for example, that a Speaker of the National Assembly can be charged and resign. The fact that the Minister of Sport and Arts and Culture can be appear before court and resign immediately. Those are progressive, important milestones along the path of renewal. And so now, can we implement those ANC policies in other political parties if they come into government? That's a critical thing. If a minister from party X or party Y is charged, can the ANC say to them, you must now step aside? Because those are ANC policies, but they're not in law, for example. So I think we need to be making very clear that when you have a coalition framework, or whatever type we look at, GNU, coalition, minority government, whatever modality we take at the end of the day, we've got to maintain those principles because society is correctly aggrieved, is correctly fed up with the cancer of corruption. And we can't afford to step back on it, especially because some of the political parties we see now in parliament, there's about 16 or so, some of them have got very concerning relationship with the rule of law, concerning relationship with the constitution, and we just can't afford, when society is exasperated by corruption, to be seen to be taking a step back for political expediency.
Yeah. Can I then just focus another question on you, Matthew Parks, before I release you? Cosatu has already rejected the idea of a DA coalescing with the ANC. And so that leaves us then with the ANC and possibly working with the EFF and, as I've mentioned. Is that kind of arrangement for you perhaps the only option that's on the table, that the only viable option perhaps, I should say? Because if South Africans are saying they fed up with corruption, would it not have been a great idea to have someone whom South Africans would say these ones have been preaching anti-corruption all this time, and why not have them as part of this arrangement in order that you have, or you play watchdog on each other? I'm talking the DA here.
Yeah, no, thanks. Look, I mean, again, the results are messy. One has to live with them because you have to take a mathematical calculation to say how do you constitute the seventh administration, how do you make sure your principles are maintained, etc. The challenge for Cosatu as a trade union federation is that DA over 30 years of the democratic dispensation has voted against every single labor law we have in this country. And the labor laws are very important to workers because they protect workers from unfair dismissals, they provide for unemployment insurance, injury and duty insurance, a national minimum wage. And it becomes very difficult for Cosatu when the DA's election manifesto anchored itself around repealing the minimum wage, which is benefits 6 million workers. It becomes difficult for Cosatu when the DA had a picket outside Cosatu House just before the elections and said Cosatu is the enemy of workers, of the unemployed, etc. So those things, they poison the well significantly. And of course, as Cosatu, we also agree with the ANC in the Alliance Transformation Agenda, BEE, National Health Insurance. So when a DA says they're diametrically opposed to all of those principles, it does become very, very difficult for Cosatu to countenance ANC coalition with the DA. But look, we are still having finalization as Cosatu on our final proposals. We had a National Office Bearers meeting this week. We've had an Alliance Secretariat. Our Cosatu Political Commission with affiliates met last night. We're having a CEC shortly, and we will want to be engaging formally with the ACCP, with the ANC, to say what is the Cosatu views to them, firstly, as a respect to them as our alliance partners, to see can we form consensus as alliance. But look, there are different modalities totally on the table. You can have a coalition, you can see which parties can be acceptable, which ones can't be. You can have a government of national unity. And again, what are the parameters? Do we allow a party to veto another party's participation in the government of national unity? There'll be some concerns around there. You could also have the ANC forming a government on its own, and they're simply seeking a supply and confidence from other parties in parliament too. And all of them have got pros and cons. We have some of our initial views on it. But I think for us, we have to maintain the principles, because if we compromise principles, that's going to yield to very unstable coalitions like we've seen at a local government level. And that's undermined service delivery, like we've seen in Tshwane. There's been real problems of corruption, there's been real problems of workers being victimized, etc. So we have to get the principles right. Otherwise, we don't want to see the chaos we've seen in Nelson Mandela Bay, for example, where mayors change every few months. We don't want to see that replicating at a national level.
All right. Finally, and very briefly, Matthew Parks, as I let you go, the MK, what else is wrong with them apart from you labeling them as quote-unquote counter-revolutionaries? What else is wrong with them? Why is it that the ANC cannot work with that party?
Well, I think there was a Zondo Commission into state capture and corruption, which I think yielded volumes for what's wrong with them. The difficulty with MK is manifold. The ANC has been plunged into a crisis because of the leadership of the former president of the ANC, Jacob Zuma. The country, as the Zondo Commission correctly highlighted, was plunged into a crisis because of the leadership of Jacob Zuma when we were plunged into state capture and corruption. Eskom and Transnet, Metro Rail, municipalities, provincial governments were devastated under his leadership. It would be difficult for the ANC to countenance a breakaway faction from the ANC and then a few months later say, no, all is forgiven, because that would then set a precedence where the ANC says every time, you can break away from us and we'll form a coalition with you afterwards.
Yeah.
No, I don't think any party would really be able to survive if they were unable to allow breakaway factions. It's difficult also when MK, fresh from the elections, whilst all other political parties, including the ANC, also Cosatu as well, have accepted the elections as free and fair, have accepted the results, even if we were pained by them. And MK is still threatening to reject them, even threatening to put a gun to the nation's head to reject the results and threatening to provoke social instability, etc. So that makes it very difficult. But we do appreciate the ANC stance where they said they are filling out to all political parties, including MK. But MK apparently has been blue ticking the ANC. So again, it doesn't help. We have serious challenges as a country of corruption, of state capture, of unemployment, of poverty, of load shedding. And we need political parties to be mature. We're not sure MK is willing to be mature, but if they are willing, sure, one can have a discussion. But I think it's a very difficult sell. I think maybe lastly on that point, Xoli, and again, one doesn't really want to get into political party. Yes, we could talk to political party B, we can't talk to you, because that'll be a bit unfair to the ANC to start negotiating in public, as opposed to in private. But if we're saying we want to respect the Constitution, which as Cosatu we support, it's a product of the liberation struggle, MK is rejecting it. We believe in respecting the rights of persons irregardless of gender or sexual orientation. And MK has a manifesto which says they reject that. They want to send pregnant young women to Robben Island. They want to abandon speaking rights of people who happen to be gay. That for us we can't agree to. So I think for us, while Xoli was saying the principles are fundamental, we must respect the Constitution. So all parties, if they're in the GNU, must respect the Constitution, the rule of law. We can't afford to repeat the chaos we saw during the decade of state capture and corruption. So I think for us, let's rather focus on the principles, and those parties who can agree to those principles, we can engage. But parties who want to treat South Africa like a banana republic, no, we would have a problem with that.
All right, Matthew Parks, he speaks for Cosatu. We are going to have to let you go. And so when we return from the break, I can see Piet Croucamp already shaking his head there at some of what Matthew Parks had to say. We're going to continue the conversation in a moment. You're watching News at Prime, and we are discussing the permutations of what is going to come out of the discussions that are underway, specifically from political parties and them trying to come together in order to form the 7th administration. And with me for this discussion is Piet Croucamp. He is a political analyst. Melusi Ncala is from the organization Corruption Watch, and we are also with Yolanda Yoli from Right to Know. In fact, let's talk to you, Yolanda Yoli. Have we completely discounted the possibility of a re-election? And I'm saying this in case nothing comes out of these talks. It results to nothing, where political parties are simply stuck. Do you think that South Africans would be eager to perhaps go for another round of elections? I just had a conversation with the IEC CEO who says, well, if there is no real agreement, a snap election could be called, and within 90 days, they would have to organize themselves as the IEC, and South Africans are back at the ballot box. Do you think that there is something of a buyer's remorse from the South African electorate right now?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the first thing, which is I'm not sure if South Africa can afford, an extension of time where we have to re-vote. I think that South Africans have stated, have put up a statement of what they want. They want governments to work together and form a government that will be representative of the broader constituents of South Africa. And I think that, yes, this is a difficult decision, but I don't think we can afford the time and the patience. South Africa is not known or isn't really a stable country in terms of civil society. And we've seen what has happened, in the July unrest, and so if we have that sort of political instability where political parties can't seem to decide who to work with and how to form a government, then, it says a lot about the type of authority that we have. So no, I don't think that we can afford, or we have the time to leave South Africa in a space where it does not have, a ruling party. It doesn't have a form of government that it has to look up to.
All right. Piet Croucamp,
yeah.
Let's come to you. The days of a one-party dominance, are those completely over?
Look, the ANC, I think, they would think in the back of their minds that it's quite possible for MK to implode, and it's quite possible to buy the loyalty of some individuals within MK. The EFF, I think they might argue, is not too far away from trying to merge back into the ANC again. If you make them part of a coalition agreement, they might just eventually end up with the ANC. And they think, well, then we're 50, 55, 56, then we're more or less there and thereabout in the next election. So I don't think they think that it's impossible for them to recover from this. That's not the history of liberation movements. They quite often, when they reach this point, it's almost close to the tipping effect, and they never recover from it. If you'll just allow me to just say one thing about your earlier conversation with Matthew Parks.
Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible that he suggests that the state capturers and the corrupt individuals are now all with MK, and the ANC can't let them out. If you write down two lists of state capturers, people who are corrupt, people who undermine the state, people who stole the state entity, the list of the ANC, it will be endless compared to what MK has. You can name one or two individuals maybe in MK, but you're not going to come up with a list of individuals in MK that's responsible for state capture and corruption. You'll get an enormously long list within the ANC. So that suggestion that, well, the state captures on that side, if we let them in, if we don't take care about the arrangement we make, then we might just get exactly what we had before. If Cyril Ramaphosa could have cleaned up the ANC or renewed it, he would have done so. He's there for 6 years now. He made very, very little headway. There are 2 people in court, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 people in court. Some people suggest a trillion rand was stolen. We're talking about a whole system. The ANC is corrupt right to the core. The state captures sit right in the middle of the thing. Let me give you one example, for instance. The Black economic empowerment, morally, it's an incredibly important policy. We have to have Black economic empowerment. We cannot do without it. It's justice to have it. But the way that the ANC applies it, it uses the supply chains and the value chains of the economy as an entry point. And from there on, with cadre deployment, it corrupts the state. It corrupts the treasury. It corrupts the economy of South Africa. It creates a sense of instability, and it creates a sense of distrust. That's the reason why the mining industry, for instance, and they are saturated with Black economic empowerment the way the ANC do it, instead of the morally justifiable version of it. That's why the mining industry is a net exporter of foreign investment in South Africa. In other words, the mining industry invests everywhere in the world and in Africa except in South Africa. It's the absence of trust, and the reason for that is the way the Black economic empowerment is used to corrupt the supply chains and the value chains in the mining industry. So it's not as if, when Matthew talks about it, he says it's important that we maintain Black economic empowerment. Yes, it is, but it must be reformed to benefit everybody in South Africa, all the Black people, all the poor people in South Africa, and it doesn't. And if the ANC thinks they can go on, and the president has suggested as much a couple of months ago, that we will even broaden black economic empowerment. He didn't say we will reinvent black economic empowerment to benefit most South Africans or black South Africans. He said we will broaden the system that we have.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. There must be a review and a revision of the policies of the ANC. If the ANC has not been renewed over the last few months. Two dominant people in court having to explain themselves is not a renewal. It's not the eradication of corruption. MK is not the corrupt party here. The ANC is the corrupt party of the two.
Well, I have to carry through that theme of state capture, Mr. Ncala. As I come to you, Piet Croucamp is completely blowing out of the water this narrative from the Cosatu representative that if they cooperate with the MK, it means that they are effectively bringing back the state capturers into government. The important signal here that we are likely to get as to whether or not the 7th administration is going to make a clean break with corruption are the list of names or list of people that we're going to see in Parliament on this first sitting. What is that list going to tell us, Mr. Ncala, if indeed we do find individuals who were implicated in the Zondo inquiry, for example?
I don't think the issue of corruption should be limited to state capture. I think it should be, it's broader than that, because corruption is a systemic issue, right? When the state capture discussion was happening and has been ongoing, it's in the context of what was systemically done to undermine the state. And so on that basis, that's why I would concur with Piet's point that, it's disingenuous to posture as though creating this narrative that, partnering with this person would be allowing corruption to re-enter, when we all know that the ANC is already rotten. So I recall months ago, there was this discussion about looking at the top 100 people from the ANC that are said to be going to Parliament. And some of those, if not most of those people, were people that were facing various corruption scandals, So then it begs the question that how is this renewal a process unfolding, right? Is it about making marginal gains? At what points? Then it also then leads to the public becoming a bit disgruntled about it, because it then raises the question of, is there a targeted approach to certain individuals? How come others get protected, and so on and so forth? Whereas when you deal with corruption, at least precedent in some in various parts of the world, is that you need to take a cutthroat approach, right? You rid yourself, or you rid yourself of the corrupt elements, or you fall on your sword to say that, in light of these allegations, I need to step aside, as the ANC would say, or so and so can no longer be. So it's almost we are negotiating our way through corruption. And that's what's going to be interesting to see about the 7th administration, is that how many of these elements or of these individuals from the current ANC and also other political parties, right, that are accused of various forms of corruption. And I don't only limit it to any particular party, but also the other ones, particularly the Democratic Alliance. How many of them form part of this new government, and what is their attitude towards corruption? Because believe you me that everybody, all of these political parties, to some degree, have said something that seemingly sounds good to the ear about dealing with corruption.
Yeah.
And mostly it has been lip service in terms of how we've dealt with it.
Well, talking about lip service, I'm going to borrow from you then as I go to Ms. Yoli. The Action SA party came out today and said they are no longer part of the multi-party charter. And in part because they believe the Democratic Alliance is prepared to sell its soul to the ANC, which they have been campaigning to get out of government, and therefore they are going to stay away. They are leaving that multi-party charter that was initiated by the Democratic Alliance. Do you think that there is a risk here that if a party such as the DA, which is the main opposition, goes into government, we may no longer have a strong opposition in parliament to keep in check those that are in government? And I'm asking you this question, having asked John Steenhuisen, who was in this studio last night, who said, no, it won't be difficult for us to keep the executive in check whilst we are at the same time trying to exercise oversight as the Democratic Alliance through Parliament. Do you think that the two are possible at the same time?
If I'm hearing you correctly, I'm sorry, I have network issues, but you're asking if it would be possible for, can you please repeat your question?
Will it be possible for the DA
Yes.
to keep the government officials accountable in Parliament as they exercise the oversight job? Will it be possible to keep the ANC in check while they, the DA, are in government themselves?
I think it will be very difficult, honestly. I think Mr. Steenhuisen is just grappling by the straws because they themselves will be part of government. So I think I did speak about this earlier on when I was speaking about transparency and accountability, that it's going to be very difficult, you know, if we have one of the pros rather of a coalition government would be the difficulty of accountability, where now if there is a problem of corruption or whatever problem that might come up, there is no there's no way to put the blame or there's no way to pinpoint the issue, because these different political parties, you know, will be pointing fingers at each other as they usually do. So I'm not sure if the DA would be able to manage that. I think the question to Mr. Steenhuisen would be how, you know, they'd be able to implement those strategies, you know, in terms of holding another political party accountable as they themselves will be part of government, and how would they be able to hold themselves accountable? Who will be holding the DA accountable if that will be a part of their role being part of government? So I really, really don't think that it is necessarily possible. Yeah, and I think, you know, this coalition really may come with a bit of instability. I want to go back to the question that you asked before about the IEC, because there's something that I forgot to say, that the country cannot have an extended time. This might cause, you know, a lot of instability, you know, because what happens if the results come back differently, or the MK now is the 5th largest party, or the ANC is the 1st largest party? So all those differences in arguments, even having, you know, a coalition government, are what might cause an instability, even with that coalition itself. So going back to, you know, the question of the DA, I don't know, I'm not really sure of that kind of possibility. More than anything, I do think that it would cause an instability in government, because they have different interests, they have different explanations or definitions to what accountability is, you know, given their differences in ideology. So really, really, I think I'm interested in understanding how they would implement that exactly.
All right, Piet Croucamp, I'm going to take a break. I'd like you to apply your mind to whether or not the opposition will be completely decimated if a large number of them do go into government in terms of keeping the executive in check. We'll take a break and come back on this point as we conclude the conversation. You're watching News at Prime, and we are concluding a conversation around what kind of government can we expect from the 7th administration, which comes with no one party that has come out dominant out of this election, and might we have problems in trying to constitute it? What about the opposition? What will become of it if a large chunk of opposition parties go into government? What will become of the opposition? Let's put that question to Piet Croucamp. Piet, please weigh in on what will happen if indeed a large chunk of the opposition find themselves in government.
Look, I think they take a massive risk. The idea of going in a coalition with the ANC was before we thought that the ANC will get 40% or 41%. At the time that the DA thought ANC might need 2 or 3 or 4%, and they will present themselves as a viable alternative to the EFF, which they thought the ANC wouldn't want to go into a coalition with because they had a bad relationship with them historically, and the same goes for NK Party, and then they present themselves. And they made the assumption that the ANC will think of them as a sort of a checks and balances which allow the market economy and the international financial institutions to gain a degree of trust and in the South African economy. So I think it was different circumstances. Now, if they do it, like I think you suggested in your question, they take a massive, massive risk because they make the assumption that there is a strategic process according to which they can influence the ANC's economic policies. If they could have, if the ANC wanted to change any of the economic policies, we would have seen something of that over the last 6 years during this renewal process of the president. They're not going to change the national health insurance. They're not going to change the Bella Act. They're not going to change black economic empowerment. They're certainly not going to change the minimum wage. None of those things will change. And that's where the DA, that's where the big differences are with the ANC. So, and the thing about the DA is, it is very possible that around about 400,000 conservative white Afrikaners might decide to go home to the Freedom Front Plus and not to return. And then the DA is in real big trouble because I can promise you they will not gain a single vote because the reason from black South Africans, because the reason that they've lost the black vote are for very, very different reasons. The alienation of black people in the DA is a legendary tale which exists because for very different reasons. You cannot fix that with the Liberal Party because black South Africans are not liberal. So the black people are not going to come back, but the Afrikaners, they might leave. And that may dip the DA again below 20%. If they could have influenced policy, I would say yes, go into an alliance with or go into some form of agreement with the ANC. But you cannot influence the economic policies of the ANC. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think you will have to take responsibility for bad governance and for good governance. So in other words, they will also have to take responsibility for some of the corruption, some of the state capture, some of the black economic empowerment that goes wrong. They will also have to take responsibility to some degree for the outcome of the national health insurance. You cannot be part of government and pick and choose which part do you want to take responsibility for. So government of national unity that we had in the 1990s, after a few months it broke up and they saw it there. It's not possible to come as a small partner and influence policies of a macro political party. And you must remember, in Parliament, the ANC will sit and NK as well as the EFF still agree with the ANC on those policies. They just take it a step further. So you cannot hold them accountable in Parliament. And that's our big problem. The Parliament or the National Assembly has never held the executive accountable. Nothing has changed in that respect. There's still enough numbers of people, of representatives, party representatives of those three parties that believe strongly in the policies of the ANC, or at least at the fundamental, at the heart of it, agree with those, concur with those policies for the ANC to keep on doing what it's doing now. So I think it's just a massive risk and there's almost no reward for them in it. It's much better for them to sit in opposition benches and seek to influence the way they think that they did it until now. Yeah. I wouldn't take that risk.
All right. Very briefly, very quick comments, Mr. Ncala. The opposition going into government, is there a risk there in the fight against corruption?
No, I mean, I think we are where we are presently in terms of, corruption. We know the issues, we know the perceptions that the global community has of South Africa in terms of corruption. When you look at something like the Corruption Perceptions Index, where South Africa in the last 6 years has constantly scored in the low 40s, which is a very, very poor score. But we are talking about reforming. And if we as the public are going to hold these parties accountable, because now it matters more than what perhaps did before, to say that here are the corruption issues that need to be tackled, we need to implement these laws, we might see some activity in that regard. Why? Because they'll be scoring points, but also, it's a way of perhaps holding whoever is in government accountable. So if anything, we'll be perhaps going into a very interesting time where transparency and accountability become principles upon which South Africa renews itself, so to speak, and we do away with the kind of lip service that we have been paying towards issues of corruption as well as human rights abuses.
Yeah. Ms. Ncala, rather, Ms. Yoli, I apologize. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time, so you'll forgive me for not being able to give you the last word. But I want to thank you sincerely for the contributions to this discussion. Melusi Ncala is with Corruption Watch, Yolanda Yoli is with Right to Know, and Piet Croucamp is a political analyst joining us in this conversation.